Clara's hands trembled as she held the edges of her suitcase. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the dusty road that led to the ranch. She had never been far from her small hometown before, and the thought of spending her life on a vast, unfamiliar property made her heart race. The carriage rattled over the uneven path, and every jolt reminded her that there was no turning back now. She was a bride, and she was about to step into a life that felt entirely unknown. The ranch came into view slowly, framed by towering oaks and a wide, open field where the grass swayed gently in the evening breeze. It looked peaceful, almost perfect, but Clara couldn't shake the nervous knot in her stomach. She had seen pictures of Ethan, her new husband, but seeing him in person was different. He stood near the barn, tall and broad-shouldered, his hat shading his face. His hands were rough and calloused, the kind of hands that spoke of hard work and long days under the sun. There was a seriousness in his eyes, a quiet authority that both intimidated and intrigued her. As the carriage rolled closer, Clara tried to steady herself. She rehearsed what she would say, the polite greetings, the smile she was supposed to wear. But the closer she got, the harder it became to speak. The air felt heavier here, filled with the scent of hay, earth, and something she couldn't name. It was foreign, and yet there was a strange allure to it, a sense of life lived fully, unafraid of toil or challenge. Ethan noticed the carriage from a distance and straightened. He had been expecting Clara, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight of her now. She was smaller than he imagined, delicate in a way that seemed almost fragile. Her hair fell in soft waves around her face, and her eyes were wide, taking in everything with a mix of fear and curiosity. He stepped forward, his boots crunching against the gravel, and tipped his hat. "Welcome," he said, his voice steady, but not unkind. Clara's throat felt tight, and she managed only a small nod in response. The words she had practiced seemed to vanish as soon as she opened her mouth. She slid down from the carriage, her fingers clutching the handle until her knuckles turned white. Ethan held out his hand, not in a formal greeting, but as a simple gesture, inviting her into this new world. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His grip was firm but careful, and for a brief moment, she felt a flicker of reassurance. The ranch was larger than she imagined. A long, wooden porch wrapped around the front of the main house, and smoke curled from the chimney into the crisp evening air. Beyond that, the fields stretched toward the horizon, dotted with horses grazing quietly. The sight was beautiful. Yet Clara's mind wandered to the unknowns, what life here would really be like, what was expected of her, and whether she could ever belong in a place so different from the small town she had always known. Ethan led her inside the house. The interior smelled of polished wood and faint traces of cooking. The walls were lined with simple furniture, functional yet welcoming. There were pictures of the ranch, of horses, and of people whose faces she didn't recognize. It felt lived in. A home with history, but it also reminded her that she was stepping into someone else's life, and she wasn't sure where she fit in just yet. They reached her room, a modest space with a large window overlooking the fields. Sunlight lingered on the floorboards, giving the room a warm, golden glow. Clara set her suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm the fluttering in her chest. The quiet of the house was almost overwhelming after the noise and familiarity of her own home. Every creak of the floorboards and whistle of the wind through the trees seemed amplified, echoing her own anxious thoughts. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. He didn't rush to fill the silence with words, understanding that she needed time to adjust. "Dinner will be ready soon," he said finally, breaking the tension gently. "Come down when you're ready." He turned and left the room, closing the door with a soft click. The sound made Clara flinch, and she realized just how alone she felt in this new place. Hours passed slowly. Clara explored the room, tracing her fingers along the windowsill, and running her hands over the bedspread. She thought about her parents and the life she had left behind, the familiar smells, the streets she knew by heart, the neighbors who had watched her grow up. All of it felt like another world now, replaced by the vast expanse of the ranch and the silent presence of her husband, who remained just beyond the walls of her room. When she finally went downstairs, the dining room was warm, filled with the smell of roasted vegetables and fresh bread. The table was set neatly, and Ethan sat at one end, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. Clara's stomach twisted with nervousness. She had never eaten with him before, had never shared a meal in this quiet, intimate setting. She felt exposed, every movement and glance charged with a weight she couldn't explain. Ethan gestured for her to sit, and she obeyed, placing her hands in her lap as if to anchor herself. They ate in relative silence at first, the only sounds the clinking of utensils and the occasional crackle from the fireplace. Then, slowly, conversation began. Ethan asked her about her journey, her hometown, the things she liked. Clara responded cautiously, feeling her words, her voice, and her presence being measured. She could see the curiosity in his eyes, the way he listened not just to her words, but to the hesitations between them. As the evening went on, Clara began to relax slightly. She realized that Ethan was not cold or unkind, merely reserved. There was a strength in him that demanded respect, but also a patience that reassured her. By the time the meal ended, a tentative connection had formed, fragile yet promising. She still didn't know what the future held, but she felt, for the first time since arriving, that maybe she could find her place here. After dinner, Ethan offered to show her around the ranch under the moonlight. Clara agreed, and they stepped outside together. The night was quiet. The stars reflected in the dark sky like tiny lanterns. The air smelled of earth and growing things, and Clara felt a strange peace in the openness. Ethan pointed out the barn, the stables, and the pasture where the horses grazed, explaining the routines and responsibilities that came with ranch life. She listened intently, realizing that this place, with all its work and vastness, would shape not just her days, but her very character. By the time they returned to the house, Clara felt a mixture of exhaustion and wonder. The day had been overwhelming, yet full of new possibilities. She understood that adapting to this life would not be easy, but there was something in Ethan's quiet presence that made her believe it was possible. That night, as she lay in bed, listening to the distant sounds of animals and the wind through the trees, she allowed herself to hope that she could belong here, that she could grow, and that perhaps, in time, she might even feel at home in the arms of the man she had just begun to know. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the ranch, Ethan watched from his own room, thinking about the delicate woman who had just stepped into his life. He knew it wouldn't be simple. He knew there would be challenges. But he also felt a rare curiosity, a desire to understand her fears, her dreams, and the tender heart she carried into this rugged, demanding world. And for the first time in a long while, he felt that perhaps this marriage could be more than an arrangement. It could be a partnership built slowly, carefully, and with mutual respect. Days on the ranch fell into a steady rhythm, and Clara quickly realized that life here was nothing like the quiet, sheltered town she had left behind. Every morning, the sun rose over the wide fields, painting the horizon with soft oranges and pinks, and she found herself waking early, not out of habit, but because there was so much to see and learn. Ethan had begun showing her the routines of the ranch, feeding the animals, checking fences, and learning the names and temperaments of each horse. At first, she fumbled through the tasks, her hands awkward with the unfamiliar work. But Ethan was patient. He corrected her gently, never raising his voice. And his calm presence gave her confidence, even when she doubted herself. Despite her growing familiarity with the ranch, Clara still felt a constant tension in her heart. Living with Ethan, sharing this new life, brought her closer to him in ways she had never expected, but it also exposed her fears. Their relationship, though polite and careful, was charged with unspoken expectations. Clara was aware of the quiet way Ethan observed her, the way he seemed to notice even the smallest details. The slight tremor in her hands when lifting a pail of water, the way her shoulders stiffened under the weight of new responsibilities. She understood that he wanted more from her than she was ready to give, and that realization made her chest tighten with both longing and worry. One evening, after a long day of tending to the fields, Ethan suggested they take a walk along the ridge behind the house. The sky was a deep violet, and the first stars were beginning to shimmer. Clara followed him, her hands brushing against the tall grass, feeling the earth beneath her feet and the cool wind on her face. Ethan spoke little, but when he did, his words were simple and thoughtful. He asked about her childhood, the friends she had left behind, and the dreams she once carried. Clara spoke cautiously at first, revealing only small details, but gradually, the dam of her nervousness broke, and she shared more than she had intended. She told him about the quiet evenings at home with her parents, about the small joys of walking to the market or sitting by the river to watch the sunset. Ethan listened, truly listened, and Clara noticed the faint softening in his expression. She realized that beneath his rugged exterior and serious demeanor, there was a man who cared deeply, though he expressed it in ways she hadn't yet learned to read. For the first time, Clara felt that she could trust him, that perhaps he would not judge her weaknesses, but instead help her grow stronger. And that thought both comforted and terrified her. She had spent her life being careful, hiding vulnerabilities, and now, here on this vast ranch, she was learning that true connection required courage. The nights, however, brought a different kind of challenge. When it came time for intimacy, Clara found herself overwhelmed by fear and uncertainty. She was inexperienced, unprepared for the emotional intensity of being so close to another person. One evening, as Ethan approached her gently, trying to bridge the growing distance that anxiety had created, Clara whispered, "It hurts, even there." The words slipped out in a quiet, almost broken voice, and Ethan froze. He stepped back instinctively, unsure of how to respond. His heart ached, not with anger or disappointment, but with concern. He had never encountered such delicate vulnerability before, and he realized that rushing or forcing anything would only cause pain, not love. For days after that, both of them navigated an uneasy silence. Clara worried that she had disappointed him, while Ethan struggled to balance his own desires with the deep respect he felt for her. He began to notice small gestures of comfort, instead holding her hand during chores, bringing her warm water after long days, and simply sitting beside her in quiet companionship. They learned that closeness did not always mean physical intimacy. A shared sunset, a conversation under the stars, or the simple act of preparing a meal together became expressions of connection that were just as meaningful as anything else. One morning, Clara awoke to the sound of the horses neighing in the distance. She stretched and found Ethan already outside, checking the fences. She followed him, carrying a bucket of feed, and together they walked along the pasture, tending to the animals. There was a rhythm to the work, a shared purpose that brought them closer in ways words could not. Clara began to notice the subtle ways Ethan showed care, how he would adjust a harness carefully, how he ensured no animal went hungry, how he spoke softly when guiding a frightened horse. In his presence, she learned patience, empathy, and the quiet strength that comes from genuine concern for another living being. Clara also discovered her own resilience. Tasks that had seemed impossible at first, lifting heavy buckets of water, mending fences, learning to ride a horse confidently became part of her daily routine. Each success, no matter how small, filled her with pride. Ethan noticed the changes, his eyes lighting up with a rare warmth when she accomplished something on her own. He never praised her excessively, but his acknowledgement was enough to strengthen her self-belief. It was in these moments that Clara began to understand that love was not just a feeling, but a series of actions, patience, and understanding. One evening, as the sun set in a golden blaze, Ethan suggested they sit by the river that ran along the edge of the ranch. Clara followed, carrying a blanket, and together they watched the water reflect the colors of the sky. It was quiet, peaceful, and yet full of unspoken emotions. Ethan turned to her and asked, gently, about her fears, the ones she had never shared with anyone else. Clara hesitated, but then, with a deep breath, she spoke. She admitted how scared she was of failure, of not being enough, and how the idea of intimacy filled her with anxiety. Ethan listened without interruption, simply holding her hand, letting her words settle between them. She felt an unexpected relief, a lightness she hadn't felt in weeks. Over time, these moments of honesty and shared effort began to build a foundation of trust. Clara realized that the ranch, with all its hard work and endless space, was teaching her lessons about resilience, patience, and partnership. Ethan, too, was learning to recognize vulnerability, to respect boundaries, and to express care without expectation. They found joy in small victories, whether it was the successful repair of a fence, the first ride Clara could take alone on a horse, or simply sitting together in silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Evenings brought quiet reflection. Clara would sit by her window, looking out at the sprawling fields, feeling the wind brush against her face. She thought about the journey she had begun, the leap from her sheltered life into a world of wide-open skies and endless responsibility. Fear still lingered, but it no longer controlled her. She had begun to find strength in herself, and comfort in the steady presence of Ethan. She understood that love was not instantaneous, nor was it easy. It required trust, patience, and a willingness to grow alongside another person. And Ethan, standing silently in the doorway or beside her in the fields, recognized that the bond they were forming was fragile yet precious. He had once believed that love was measured in grand gestures and immediate passion, but now he understood its deeper truth. It was built in quiet companionship, in mutual respect, and in the courage to face fears together. Every day brought small steps forward, and each step strengthened the foundation of a relationship that, though still new and uncertain, held the promise of something lasting. By the time autumn settled over the ranch, painting the fields with shades of gold and brown, Clara and Ethan had developed a new rhythm, not just in work, but in life. They shared laughter over minor mishaps, comforted each other after long, tiring days, and quietly celebrated their individual and shared accomplishments. Their connection had deepened, no longer defined by awkwardness or fear, but by understanding, respect, and a growing sense of partnership. Though Clara's whispered words from that first night still lingered in the memory of both, they no longer defined the relationship. Instead, they had become a starting point, a reminder that love required patience, empathy, and care. Every gentle gesture, every shared moment of labor and quiet conversation was a step toward a bond that would endure, a bond built not in haste, but in trust. And so, life on the ranch continued, full of hard work, unexpected joy, and the slow, steady growth of two people learning to navigate not just a marriage, but the terrain of each other's hearts. Clara had arrived fragile and unsure, but she was beginning to stand tall, shaped by the challenges and nurtured by the patience of the man who had become her partner. And Ethan, the stoic rancher, was learning to soften without losing his strength, discovering that love could exist in the quiet moments as much as in the grand ones. Together, they were finding their way, one day at a time. The chill of early morning crept over the ranch as Clara stepped outside, pulling her shawl tightly around her shoulders. The fields were covered with a delicate layer of frost, sparkling in the first rays of the sun. The horses stamped their hooves impatiently, eager for their morning feed, and Clara moved among them with growing confidence. She had been at the ranch long enough now to know the routines, to anticipate the needs of the animals, and to feel a sense of belonging in the rhythm of farm life. But as she worked, Her mind kept returning to Ethan. Their relationship had changed since the first weeks. The tension that had once defined their interactions had softened into a quiet understanding. Yet there were still walls between them, subtle barriers built from fear, hesitation, and the weight of past expectations. Clara often caught herself studying Ethan as he moved through the fields, noticing the small, careful gestures, the way he adjusted a saddle, the way he spoke to the animals, or the way his expression softened when he thought no one was looking. These moments fascinated her, and she longed to understand the man beneath the stoic exterior. Ethan, for his part, noticed the changes in Clara too. She was no longer hesitant or unsure in her movements. She carried herself with a quiet strength, tackling tasks with determination and a growing confidence. Yet, he also noticed her stillness in moments that required vulnerability. The way she hesitated when certain subjects came up, and the way her eyes darted when emotions ran too deep. It reminded him that intimacy, in all its forms, required patience, something he was learning to give more of with each passing day. One afternoon, after finishing the morning chores, Ethan suggested they repair a section of fencing near the northern pasture. Clara agreed, carrying the tools beside him. The task was simple but required teamwork, and as they worked side by side, the air between them was filled with quiet conversation. Ethan instructed Clara gently, explaining how to secure the posts and tighten the wire. And Clara listened attentively, absorbing every detail. There were moments of laughter when the wire snapped unexpectedly or a post refused to fit. And in those moments, their connection deepened without words. After hours of labor, they paused, leaning on the wooden fence and catching their breath. The landscape stretched endlessly before them, rolling hills bathed in golden light. Clara felt a sense of accomplishment swell in her chest. She had contributed to the ranch's upkeep, learned new skills, and shared a productive day with Ethan. The silence that followed was not empty. It was comfortable, filled with mutual respect and an unspoken understanding of each other's efforts. As evening approached, Ethan led Clara to the barn, suggesting they groom the horses together. Clara had grown fond of the animals, finding solace and confidence in their predictable rhythms. She ran a brush over a chestnut mare, feeling the soft warmth of the animal beneath her hands, while Ethan worked with a gray stallion nearby. The act of caring for the horses became symbolic, a mirror of the growing care and patience between them. In these moments, Clara realized that intimacy was not solely defined by closeness in the usual sense it existed in shared labor, in trust, and in the gentle guidance they gave each other. Over the following weeks, the couple began to share more personal stories. Clara spoke of her childhood in the small town, the simple joys and hardships she had experienced, and the dreams she had once nurtured. Ethan, in turn, revealed pieces of his past, the struggles of maintaining the ranch, the loss of friends, and the burdens he had carried alone. These exchanges were slow, deliberate, and often accompanied by long pauses. But each story told, each secret shared, chipped away at the invisible walls between them. Trust grew quietly, like the first shoots of grass after winter, steady and unhurried. One particularly cold evening, they sat by the fireplace in the main house. Clara had brought a book, but instead of reading, they ended up talking about life, hopes, and fears. Clara admitted how the past few weeks had been challenging, how she sometimes felt overwhelmed by the responsibilities and expectations placed on her. Ethan listened without judgment, offering quiet reassurances and small gestures of care, bringing her a warm cup of tea, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders, and simply sitting close enough that she felt his presence but not pressured. In that moment, Clara felt a profound sense of safety, a rare feeling she had seldom experienced. The relationship between them continued to evolve, and with it, Clara's confidence grew. She became more skilled in her work on the ranch, more attuned to the animals, and more aware of the subtle ways Ethan expressed care. She began to understand that love could exist without constant words or grand gestures. It was in the shared smiles, the patient instruction, and the small acts of thoughtfulness. These discoveries filled her with hope and a sense of purpose she had never felt before. Yet there were still moments of uncertainty. Intimacy, both emotional and physical, remained a delicate subject. Clara's whispered words from the first night occasionally resurfaced in her mind, reminding her that vulnerability required courage. Ethan, aware of her hesitations, refrained from pressing, understanding that trust could not be rushed. Instead, he focused on creating a safe environment where Clara could grow, where her comfort mattered more than his desires. This patience became a foundation for their bond, reinforcing the lesson that true partnership was built on understanding and respect rather than expectation. One morning, after a heavy snowfall had blanketed the ranch, Ethan suggested a walk to check on the livestock. Clara wrapped herself in a thick coat and followed him, marveling at the pristine white landscape. The animals left tracks in the snow, and the wind carried a crisp, clean scent that invigorated her. As they walked, Ethan shared stories of past winters on the ranch, the challenges of maintaining warmth, and the joy of seeing life endure through harsh conditions. Clara listened, feeling both admiration and gratitude for the life he had built here. A life that required strength, patience, and resilience. In the days that followed, Clara and Ethan found comfort in the rhythms of routine. They worked together in the fields, prepared meals side by side, and shared quiet evenings by the fireplace. Each small act reinforced their growing connection. Clara noticed how Ethan's presence provided stability, while he noticed her increasing confidence and ease in navigating the ranch. Together, they began to understand that intimacy was not simply a matter of physical closeness, but a complex tapestry of trust, care, and shared experience. As the season shifted toward late autumn, Clara and Ethan spent more time exploring the ranch together, discovering hidden nooks, small streams, and groves of trees that offered both beauty and quiet solitude. These excursions became moments of bonding, where laughter and conversation flowed more freely. Clara began to see Ethan not just as a stoic rancher, but as a man capable of tenderness, patience, and deep understanding. And Ethan, in turn, saw Clara not just as a delicate bride, but as a strong, intelligent partner, capable of facing challenges with courage and grace. The turning point came one evening as they sat together watching the sun set behind the distant hills. Clara leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. There were no words, only the shared comfort of companionship. In that silence, both of them recognized the depth of their bond, not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the quiet understanding that they were learning to trust, respect, and support each other fully. Clara reflected on the journey she had undertaken, the leap from her small town into a world so vast and unfamiliar, the fears she had confronted, and the strength she had discovered within herself. She realized that love, in its truest form, was patient, gentle, and built on a foundation of mutual respect. Ethan had shown her that intimacy could exist in small gestures, in shared work, and in the courage to be vulnerable without fear. Ethan, too, reflected on the changes he had witnessed. Clara's presence had softened the edges of his life, reminding him of the joys of companionship and the importance of patience. He had learned that true connection required more than desire, it required understanding, empathy, and the willingness to grow together. Each day spent with Clara reinforced the realization that their partnership, though still evolving, was rooted in something far deeper than appearances or expectation. By the end of autumn, the ranch felt more alive than ever. The couple had faced challenges together, shared laughter and quiet moments, and begun to forge a bond built on patience and trust. Clara had grown stronger, more confident, and more attuned to the rhythms of ranch life. Ethan had learned to express care in subtle, meaningful ways, creating a safe and nurturing environment for both of them. Together, They had begun to understand the true nature of partnership, a delicate balance of strength, patience, and shared vulnerability. And so, life on the ranch continued, full of work, wonder, and quiet growth. Clara and Ethan had discovered that love was not a sudden spark, but a slow burning flame, nurtured by daily acts of understanding, respect, and care. Each shared task, each conversation, each moment of silent companionship brought them closer, strengthening the bond that would carry them through the seasons of life together. Though challenges remained, and the journey was far from over, they now faced the future with a sense of hope and determination. Clara had found a place in the vast, demanding world of the ranch, and Ethan had discovered the profound reward of patience and empathy. Together, they were building not just a life, but a partnership rooted in trust, understanding, and the quiet, enduring power of love. Winter had arrived at the ranch, painting the fields and hills with a soft layer of snow. The air was crisp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Clara wrapped herself in a thick woolen shawl as she stepped outside, the crunch of snow beneath her boots echoing through the quiet morning. Life on the ranch had changed over the past months. She had grown stronger, more confident, and more capable of facing challenges that once seemed impossible. Yet, as the cold season settled in, Clara knew there were still lessons to learn, lessons about patience, trust, and the quiet strength required to sustain a partnership. Ethan was already outside, preparing the barn for the winter. He had learned to anticipate the needs of the animals, making sure each stall was warm and secure. Clara watched him for a moment, noting the careful way he adjusted the blankets on the horses and checked the feed. There was a rhythm to his work, a combination of strength and attentiveness that had always impressed her, but now it carried a deeper meaning. She understood that this man, who had once seemed so distant, had grown to value her presence, her efforts, and her heart. "Good morning," Ethan said, his voice steady but soft. He gestured to the stalls. "Let's get the horses fed before the storm gets worse." Clara nodded, feeling the warmth of his regard, and together, they moved through the barn. The tasks were familiar now, lifting feed buckets, brushing coats, ensuring each animal was comfortable, but each action carried a new significance. Every shared effort reinforced their growing bond, and Clara felt the satisfaction of knowing they were partners in this life, working side by side toward a shared goal. After the chores, Ethan suggested they take a walk along the frozen stream that ran at the edge of the property. Clara agreed, enjoying the quiet beauty of the landscape. The trees were bare, their branches outlined with frost, and the sun reflected off the snow, casting a dazzling glow. As they walked, they spoke in low tones, sharing thoughts and reflections from the past months. Clara found herself opening up in ways she never had before, talking about her fears, her hopes, and the subtle joys she had discovered in ranch life. Ethan listened carefully, never interrupting, and in his presence, she felt a rare sense of safety and acceptance. The walk turned into a long conversation about their dreams for the future. Clara admitted that she had once been scared of marriage and of leaving her home, but she had grown to appreciate the life they were building together. She spoke of the satisfaction she found in learning the ranching skills, in caring for the animals, and in discovering her own resilience. Ethan, in turn, shared his vision for the ranch, explaining how he hoped to maintain it, expand it, and one day pass it on. Clara realized that they were no longer strangers navigating uncertainty. They were partners working toward shared goals, learning to balance responsibility, affection, and trust. Evenings became moments of quiet reflection. Clara often sat by the fireplace, a warm cup of tea in hand, and watched the flames dance. She thought about the journey she had undertaken, leaving her small hometown, stepping into an unfamiliar world, and learning to navigate the complexities of a new relationship. She had discovered that love was not merely a feeling, but a series of deliberate choices: the choice to listen, the choice to support, and the choice to be patient. Ethan's presence had shown her that strength could coexist with tenderness, and that true partnership required both. One particularly cold night, a blizzard began to howl across the ranch, shaking the windows and covering the fields in fresh snow. Clara was nervous, worried about the animals and the safety of the property. Ethan, sensing her unease, took her hand and reassured her. "We've faced storms before," he said quietly. "We'll get through this together." His words, simple yet profound, reminded her that trust was built not just in calm moments, but in times of challenge. Together, they moved through the barn, checking the stalls, feeding the animals, and ensuring that everything was secure. By the time they returned to the warmth of the house, Clara felt a deep sense of accomplishment and partnership. They had faced the storm together, both literally and figuratively, and emerged stronger. Over the following weeks, the winter settled into a quiet rhythm. Clara and Ethan continued their routines, working together on chores, caring for the animals, and exploring the ranch. When the weather allowed, there were moments of shared laughter when a horse misbehaved or when snowdrifts blocked a pathway. There were also quiet moments of reflection, sitting side by the fireplace, sharing thoughts, and simply enjoying each other's presence. The intimacy between them had grown not in the rush of physical closeness, but in the steady, patient understanding that love could be expressed through care, respect, and shared experience. Clara began to notice subtle changes in herself. She was no longer hesitant in her movements, no longer anxious about making mistakes. She approached each day with confidence, knowing that Ethan valued her efforts and that their partnership was built on mutual respect. She had learned to trust not only him but also herself, discovering a resilience and capability she had not known existed. And Ethan, observing her growth, felt pride and admiration, recognizing that their bond was strengthened by both challenge and understanding. One evening, as the sun set behind snow-covered hills, Ethan and Clara walked to the top of a small ridge overlooking the ranch. The view was breathtaking, fields of white stretching to the horizon, the sky painted with shades of pink and gold. Clara leaned on Ethan's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence. For the first time, she realized that she did not need to fear intimacy, for it was not defined by immediacy or perfection, but by the trust and patience they had built together. Ethan's steady support had shown her that love was not just a feeling, but a shared journey. In the following months, Clara and Ethan continued to build their life together. They shared daily routines, small victories, and the quiet beauty of companionship. Clara's confidence grew, and she began taking initiative in caring for the ranch, suggesting improvements, and finding joy in the success of their collective efforts. Ethan, in turn, learned to express affection more openly, celebrating her accomplishments, listening attentively, and creating moments of comfort and reassurance. Their bond had deepened into a partnership that balanced strength with tenderness, responsibility with care, and independence with mutual support. The approaching spring brought new challenges and opportunities. The snow melted, revealing the fertile land beneath, and the ranch required careful preparation for planting and growth. Clara and Ethan worked together tirelessly, planning the fields, repairing fences, and ensuring that every animal and aspect of the ranch was ready for the season. In the shared labor, they discovered joy, satisfaction, and a deeper connection that came from facing challenges together. Each day strengthened their partnership, reinforcing the lessons of patience, understanding, and trust that had carried them through winter. By the time the first flowers of spring bloomed, Clara and Ethan had reached a profound understanding of each other. They had learned to communicate without words, to anticipate each other's needs, and to share the burdens and joys of daily life. Clara had grown into a confident, capable woman, and Ethan had softened without losing his strength. Together, they had built not just a life, but a partnership rooted in respect, empathy, and the quiet power of love. One evening, as the sun set over the ranch, Clara and Ethan stood together on the porch, looking out over the fields that had become their shared world. The air was warm with the promise of spring, carrying the scent of earth, grass, and new beginnings. Clara turned to Ethan, her eyes reflecting gratitude, respect, and a deep affection that had grown steadily over time. Ethan, in return, looked at her with quiet pride and unwavering support. They did not need to speak. Their shared history, their daily struggles and triumphs, and their growing trust conveyed everything that words could not. In that moment, both Clara and Ethan understood the true nature of their journey. They had faced uncertainty, fear, and vulnerability. Yet they had emerged stronger, more confident, and deeply connected. Their love was no longer defined by hesitation or doubt, but by the shared strength, patience, and understanding that had grown between them. Together, they had created a life that was resilient, nurturing, and full of quiet joy. The ranch, once a place of unknown challenges and distant authority, had become a home built not only on the labor of the land, but on the shared labor of hearts and trust. Clara had found her place, not just as a wife, but as a partner. A capable and respected presence in every aspect of life on the ranch. Ethan had discovered the rewards of patience, empathy, and unwavering support, recognizing that love flourished not in haste, but in care, understanding, and shared experience. And so, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, casting long shadows across the fields, Clara and Ethan stood side by side, ready to face whatever the future held. Their journey had been long and filled with challenges, yet it had brought them closer in ways that neither could have anticipated. They had discovered that true love was not instantaneous, but a gradual, deliberate creation, a partnership built on trust, respect, patience, and the courage to grow together. Together, they turned toward the house, their footsteps crunching in the snow, hearts aligned, and spirits intertwined. The ranch, with all its beauty, demands, and endless horizons, had become the backdrop for a love that was patient, enduring, and profoundly real. And as the wind whispered through the trees and the first stars appeared in the night sky, Clara and Ethan knew, without doubt, that they had found not only each other, but the strength, trust, and connection that would carry them through all seasons of life.